Hey everyone, just wanted to take a moment to discuss the one-to-one relationship and discuss the recursive relationship. So first of all, I want to kind of say that these relationships might be a little bit confusing at first glance, okay? But if we think about them in terms of reality and we think about them in terms of databases that we might run into, I think they'll start to make some more sense, okay? So if they're not clicking immediately, don't be too discouraged, okay? But with a one-to-one relationship, what we're essentially saying is we have two entities. In this example that I'm showing you right here, we have a department entity and we have an employee entity. And we're saying that not only is there a relationship between department and employee, to where department has one to many employees, employee belongs to one and only one department. That's this first relationship. We're also saying there's a second relationship. The second relationship between department and employee is what we're going to talk about today. And that is to say that there's a one-to-one relationship between department and employee, such that department has one and only one department boss. So basically, there's not just one relationship, but two relationships between these two entities. So essentially, what you want to think about is, where do you put the foreign key for that? We know that on each relationship, on at least one side, we have to have a foreign key. Now, if we go back to this example here, we could put the department ID for the employee that they're the boss of. But the problem is that's not really the best way to do it, because for most people, they're not going to be the boss of a department. Instead, what I'd recommend doing is on the department entity, you would put the department boss as a foreign key that references the employee number from the employee entity. That'd be my preference there. You always want to minimize the amount of null values, but technically speaking, either approach would work and be functional. So, is every department going to have a boss? Is every employee going to be a boss? Essentially, every department probably will have a boss, but not every employee is going to be a boss. That's just another way to think about that. So essentially, you're going to put the foreign key with the one that has more likelihood of it being necessary. The other topic I wanted to mention today was recursive relationships. So with recursive relationships, instead of having a relationship between two entities, we have one entity that has a relationship with itself. Now that might be confusing at first, and that's pretty normal. But I want you to imagine that you had, say, an entity for royalty. And you want to figure out, what is the succession order of the royalty? One way you could do that is to have a recursive relationship where the entity basically would include an attribute for something like, hey, who preceded this person? Because if you know who preceded the person, you can actually build a query that's going to loop back, and it's going to go all the way through and give you the hierarchy, or not the hierarchy, but the order in which each member of the royalty served. That's a pretty common example of a recursive relationship. In the example we have on the screen here, though, we have an employee entity, and what we have is we have an employee's boss. So what we're basically saying is, for any given boss, they have one to many employees. An employee has one and only one boss. Now, you could definitely twist hairs and say, does every employee have a boss? And not necessarily. That's going to be a business rule. Okay, so that could be a 0 to 1, or that could be a 1 and only 1. Or if you're in a poorly run organization, that could be a 1 to many. Okay? That's just going to depend on organization rules. So essentially, you're just going to add in a foreign key inside of this employee, and you could call that foreign key anything. So I would call it boss, and it would be a foreign key that references the employee number, all existing within inside the employee entity. Now, having said that, you could definitely do that a different way. you could add in essentially an associative entity with employee, and you could avoid having a recursive relationship altogether. And you would have to do that, by the way, if this were a many-to-many relationship. If a boss could have many employees and an employee could have many bosses, you would have to represent that with an associative entity. So I hope that was helpful in sort of clarifying what recursive relationships and what one-to-one relationships are. Definitely check out the tutorials that are posted in the LC for further information about those. But I do hope you have a great rest of your day,